Is Ngozi Adiemi, and I want to tell you about the 6 months I spent saying goodbye. Not dramatic goodbyes, not the kind that happen in doorways with raised voices and things that cannot be taken back. Quiet ones, the kind that look from the outside like nothing at all. A phone call not returned, an invitation declined, a conversation that ends when it should and does not start again. One by one, over 6 months, I removed from my life the people who were taking more than they were giving. And I want to tell you exactly what that cost me and exactly what came after, because the second part is the part that nobody talks about when they tell you to let people go. They tell you to let go. They do not always tell you what the letting go feels like when you are in the middle of it. They do not always tell you about the silence and the second guessing and the specific loneliness of a life that used to be full of people and is now full of space. And they do not always tell you what God does with available space. I'm going to tell you all of it. Let me start with the people, because you cannot understand the letting go without understanding who I was letting go of and what each of them was costing me. First, there was my cousin Ifunanya. Ifunanya called me in crisis. This is not an exaggeration. She called me exclusively in crisis. In 10 years, I cannot remember a single conversation that began with anything other than a problem that required my immediate attention, my money, my contacts, my time, my emotional energy. When the crisis was resolved, she disappeared back into her life until the next one. I did not hear from her between crises. There were no calls to ask how I was doing, no messages to say she was thinking of me, no presence in my life except the presence of emergency. Then there was my friend Bola. Bola was more complicated than Ifunanya because Bola was genuinely funny and genuinely warm, and I genuinely loved her. But Bola had a quality that I had been accommodating for years without naming it clearly. When things went well for me, Bola was somewhere else. When things went badly for me, Bola was present, sympathetic, available, in fact, at her most loving and her most engaged when I was struggling. I noticed this pattern for years before I was willing to say what it meant. What it meant was that Bola was more comfortable with my difficulty than with my success. That my success made her uncomfortable in a way she could not fully control. And I had spent years managing that discomfort by not talking about the things that were going well, by minimizing my achievements, by making myself smaller in her presence so she could remain comfortable. Then there was my partner, Emeka. Emeka I will not talk about at length because some people deserve more privacy than a full account. What I will say is that what I had understood as patience had become, over 4 years, something closer to a habit of accepting less than I had agreed to. And habits of acceptance, if left long enough, become the terms of the relationship, which means the relationship has been quietly renegotiated without your consent in a direction that does not serve you while you are busy being patient. And then there were the smaller ones, the colleague who borrowed things and returned them late or not at all, the neighbor who knocked at inconvenient hours and stayed longer than invited, a friend of a friend who had become a fixture in my social life, not because I had chosen her, but because she was simply there, taking up space and energy and the particular resource of my attention. All of them, in their individual ways, were people I was giving to in excess of what I was receiving. And all of them in their individual ways had become normal. This is the most important thing I want you to hear before I tell you what I did. They had become normal. The imbalance had been present for so long that I had stopped experiencing it as imbalance and had started experiencing it as simply the texture of my relationships. This is what happens when you accommodate too much for too long. The accommodation becomes the standard, and the standard feels like reality. I want to stop here and ask you, how long have you been accommodating something that you have stopped calling an accommodation? Something that started as a temporary arrangement. I will give a little extra here. I will be patient here. I will wait for this to improve, and has since become the permanent structure of a relationship or a situation. How long has it been? And do you remember when you stopped noticing? Tell me in the comments, because I think this is one of the most common and most expensive things people do, and I think most of us are in the middle of it right now without fully seeing it. I made the decision on an ordinary Wednesday evening, not because something dramatic happened that day, because I sat down to eat dinner alone and I thought, with a clarity that surprised me with its completeness, I am tired. Not the tired that comes from working too hard or sleeping too little. The tired that comes from giving too much to too many people who have stopped noticing that you are giving. I sat with that tiredness for a long time, and then I thought, what if I stopped? Not forever, not dramatically, just what if I gave less for a while? What if I returned fewer crisis calls? What if I declined more invitations? What if I stopped managing Bola's discomfort with my success and simply let my success exist at full size in my own life? What if I had the conversation with Emeka that I had been delaying for a year because I knew what it would reveal and I was not ready to deal with what it revealed? What if I chose myself, not instead of everyone else, not permanently, just what if I made myself the first consideration for a season and let everything else arrange itself around that? I decided to try.
The first goodbye was Ifunanya. She called on a Thursday with a financial problem that was, in its structure, identical to the financial problem she had called me about 8 months earlier. I had helped then. I helped the time before that. I had established, without intending to, that I was available to absorb her financial crises as they arose. I listened to the whole story, and then I said, Ifunanya, I love you, but I am not able to help with this right now. I hope you find a way through it. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, Are you serious? I said yes. She said, I cannot believe this. I said, I know this is not what you expected. I am sorry the timing is hard. She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand. I felt, in order, guilt, the specific discomfort of having said no to someone who expected yes, and then, underneath both of those things, quieter and more surprising, relief. Just relief, clean and uncomplicated. The relief of a person who has put down something heavy and discovered that their arms are still working. The conversation with Emeka took longer and cost more, and I will not reconstruct it in full. What I will tell you is that it was honest in a way that our previous conversations had not been, because I was no longer interested in managing the outcome. I said what was true. He said what was true. What was true, assembled together in one conversation, made clear that what we had built together was not the thing I had believed I was building. Not because either of us was a bad person, because we had different ideas about what we were building and had been too comfortable for too long to say so. We ended things. He was hurt. I was sad. Both of those things were real, and neither of them changed what was true. I sat in my flat the evening after that conversation, and I thought, I am now alone in a way I have not been alone in 4 years. And the thought did not frighten me the way I had expected it to. It felt like the phone call with Ifunanya, like something being put down. The Bola conversation was the hardest, not because it was more dramatic, it was less dramatic than the others, but because I loved her, and what I had to say to her was not an accusation, it was an observation, and observations that are true but unwelcome are the most delicate things to say to someone you love. I said, Bola, I have noticed something, and I want to tell you about it because I think our friendship is worth honesty. I said, when things go well for me, you are less present. When things are difficult, you are exactly there. I have been managing your discomfort with my good news for a long time by making my good news smaller, and I cannot keep doing that. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I did not know you noticed. I said, I noticed. She said, I did not know I was doing it. I said, I believe you. And I did believe her. People do not always know they are doing the things they are doing. That does not make the things less real. I said, I need some space. Not forever, just some time to stop managing this and figure out if we can find a different way. She said, "Okay." We did not speak for 3 months. Now, I want to ask you something that is harder than the first question. Have you ever had to tell someone you love something that was true and unwelcome about the way they were in the relationship with you? And if you did, how did it feel afterward?
Not in the moment, but in the days that followed. Was there relief? Was there just sadness? Was it both? Tell me in the comments, because I think the honesty we owe the people we love is one of the things we most consistently avoid, and I think the avoidance costs more than the honesty ever would have. The 6 months were quiet, much quieter than my life had been before. Afunanya did not call. She had, I think, found another source for what she needed, which confirmed what I had suspected about the nature of what she was looking for. Emeka was not there. Bola was at a distance. The smaller people, the colleague, the neighbor, the friend of a friend, had drifted, as people do when you stop being actively available, to other orbits. I want to be honest with you about what those months felt like, because I think there is a version of this story that presents letting go as immediately liberating, as if the moment you release the people who are taking too much, you are flooded with light and peace and everything opens up. That was not my experience. My experience was, it was quiet, and the quiet was uncomfortable. I had been surrounded by people and their needs for so long that the absence of those needs felt strange. I had organized a significant portion of my time and energy around responding to other people, and without that organizing principle, I had to figure out what I actually wanted to do with my time and energy when nobody was asking me to direct it somewhere else. This turned out to be a more difficult question than I expected, not because I had no interests, because I had spent so many years being available to other people that I had lost the practice of being available to myself. The habit of attending to myself, of sitting with my own wants and preferences and needs without immediately subordinating them to someone else's, that habit had to be rebuilt from the beginning, slowly, without immediate results. I want to ask you something. If all the people who regularly need things from you stopped needing things from you tomorrow, what would you do with the time and the energy? Do you know? Is the answer clear and immediate, or would you have to sit with it for a while before you found out? Tell me in the comments, because I think the answer to that question tells you something important about how much of yourself you have been giving away. The things that came into the space are the part I promised to tell you, and the part I have been building toward since the beginning. I want to say first that they did not arrive immediately. I want to say that clearly because I think one of the damaging myths about this kind of decision is that the good things come quickly as a reward for the letting go. They do not always come quickly. Sometimes the space is empty for a while before it fills, and the emptiness is part of the process, not a sign that the process is not working. The first thing that came was something I had not expected: clarity about my work. I had been working in a way that was competent but not fully engaged, doing what was required without bringing what I actually had to bring, which is what happens when most of your energy is directed elsewhere. In the quiet months, I found myself thinking about my work in ways I had not thought about it for years, seeing possibilities I had been too distracted to see, making connections between things that the noise of other people's needs had been drowning out. Within 4 months, I had developed an approach to a problem in my field that I had been circling for 2 years without being able to see clearly. I presented it. It was received in a way that opened doors I had not expected to open. The second thing was a friendship, a real one, the kind that is built slowly, with someone who has no crisis to bring, no discomfort to manage, no need that exceeds what they are also giving. She came into my life through a work connection, and she became, over the quiet months, the person I talked to most, not because I needed to talk, because I wanted to. The difference between those two things is enormous, and I had forgotten it.
The third thing was a relationship. I will not describe it in detail because it is still being built, and some things need room to grow without being described. What I will tell you is that it is built on completely different terms than the one that ended, and those terms are possible because I rebuilt my own terms first. I talked to Bola after 3 months. We had the conversation that our friendship had needed for years. It was uncomfortable and real, and it changed the shape of what we are to each other. Smaller in some ways, more honest in all of them. I am glad we had it. I am glad I gave her the truth instead of continuing to manage the distance between us. Afuninya called once 8 months after I told her I could not help. She called to tell me she had figured it out on her own. Her voice had a quality it had not had in years, something like pride. I said, I am glad. I meant it. I want to end with the thing I most want you to hear, not as a lesson. I am not interested in telling you what to do, as an observation about how space works. The people who take from you do not leave empty space when they go. They leave available space. And available space is different from empty space in one important way. Empty space is absence. Available space is possibility. The noise that draining people make in your life, the constant low-level hum of their needs and your responses to those needs, drown out things that are trying to reach you, things that require quiet to be heard, things that will not compete with the noise of other people's emergencies for your attention. When the noise stops, you can hear them. God does not fill space you are already using. He fills space you make available, and the making available, the saying no, the declining, the setting of the boundary, the quiet goodbyes, that is not a closing, that is an opening. It took me 6 months to understand this. It will take me the rest of my life to practice it. But the practice has already changed everything. And it started with a Wednesday evening and a thought and the courage to put something heavy down. The arms still work. They always did. They just needed to be empty before you could see what they were for.